Hello and welcome to the Daily Aus. I'm Zara.
I'm Billi.
Billi, we are officially back for 2025. And
Woo!
So our first episode back, we thought, I turned off during the holiday period. It's a really necessary thing to do sometimes, to just reboot, spend time with your loved ones. But that meant that, some of us might have missed the news headlines over the holiday period.
It was actually quite a heavy headline
It
period.
was.
There was a lot of pretty dark news, but we thought we'd spend today catching you up on everything that happened over the break.
Exactly. Get back into work knowing exactly what you missed.
Zara, I think we should start with what was probably the biggest story of the break, and it happened only in the past few days.
Yeah.
The terrorist attack that happened in New Orleans. Do you want to take us through what happened?
Yeah, so on New Year's Day in the very early morning in New Orleans in the state of Louisiana, which is in the south of the US, 14 people were killed and dozens more were injured when a pickup truck was driven into a crowd of people on Bourbon Street, which is the heart of New Orleans. The attacker also died at the scene, and very soon after the incident occurred, authorities classified it as a premeditated terrorist attack. An ISIS flag and an explosive device were found in the vehicle, and though initially after the attack the FBI believed that perhaps there could be other attackers at large, they have now confirmed that the suspect acted alone.
And so what do we know about that person who was driving this vehicle?
Well, police identified the attacker pretty soon after. His name was Shamsuddin Bahar Jabbar, and he was a 37-year-old US citizen from Texas. Now, he'd served about 8 years in the US Army. He'd been deployed to Afghanistan, but he had since left, so he was an Army veteran. In a press conference after the attack took place, Christopher Rea, who's from the FBI's Counterterrorism Division, explained that Jabbar had posted several videos proclaiming his support for ISIS in the days prior to the attack. And so that goes back into why they have declared this a premeditated terrorist attack. In the hours before the attack, Jabbar posted a video to his Facebook explaining that he initially planned to harm his family and friends, but that he was concerned that the media would not focus on, and I'm quoting here, the war between the believers and the disbelievers.
That's quite a chilling detail, that he had initially planned to attack his friends and family.
Yeah, and that ultimately he decided against it and instead rammed this car through, a crowd of strangers, killing, as we said, 14 people and injuring so many others. After the attack, Louisiana Governor Jeff Landry declared a state of emergency, which allows for all of the state resources to be used, and that just shows the gravity of what happened. And that's especially important because there are several major events taking place in the city of New Orleans over the coming months. So there's the Super Bowl, which is a huge NFL game. That's scheduled for the 9th of February. And then there's Mardi Gras, which is scheduled for the 5th of March and brings millions and millions of tourists to this southern city.
Yeah, those are two really huge events. So no doubt there will be a lot of heightened security there. Just quickly before we move on, just after the story in New Orleans broke, there were then reports of another vehicle attack in Las Vegas. And initially there was a lot of confusion about whether those two attacks were linked.
Yeah, exactly.
But were they?
They weren't. So authorities said they'd found no evidence that there was any connection between the terrorist attack in New Orleans and the detonation of a Tesla Cybertruck, as you said, outside a Trump hotel in Vegas on the same day. But they did break within minutes of each other. The driver of the Cybertruck has been identified. His name was Matthew Livelsberger. But the reason I think that there was so much confusion is because there were quite a few striking similarities between these two events. So firstly, the driver of the Cybertruck and the person who drove through the crowds in New Orleans both served in the army and both served in Afghanistan. And the second similarity, I guess, is that they both rented their cars on the same platform, on Turo. And so at first there was a bit of confusion, but authorities did confirm that there wasn't a connection between the two events. So what happened in Vegas is that this person, Matthew Livelsberger, parked this Cybertruck outside a Trump hotel before shooting himself and then the vehicle exploding. Now, there were no other casualties other than the driver himself, but 7 other people were injured in the incident.
Just crazy that those two things happened within hours of each other, and the similarities between the attackers, the fact that they had both served in Afghanistan, that they were both in the military, obviously. crazy similarities.
Yeah, it is, but seemingly unrelated.
Yeah. And just one other thing, there was also another vehicle attacked that occurred over the holiday period.
Yeah.
There was one in Germany, right?
Yeah, so this was a bit earlier in the holiday period. It was before Christmas, and it occurred in Magdeburg in Germany, where a person drove a car through a Christmas market, killed 5 people and injured hundreds more. And this wasn't the first time something like this had happened in Germany either. So what was interesting about this is that after a similar thing had happened years ago in Germany, Christmas markets across the country had erected cement bollards, so those cement things that stop people from driving through crowds. And yet this driver was still able to navigate his way through those cement blockades and come through the emergency exits and entrance and still kill 5 people, despite the German authorities, I guess, being prepared for something like this happening.
So they didn't drive over the bollards. They literally just drove around it.
Yeah, well, there was an entry and an exit point that didn't have those bollards. And so they came through and left through that. But in this case, the driver wasn't killed. So he's alive and has been charged. In Germany, they have quite strict privacy laws. So the man's full name wasn't released by authorities. It was reported by media, but authorities only called him Taleb A. And what they told us about him is that he's a 50-year-old doctor who migrated to Germany in 2006. He's a permanent citizen in Germany, but was born in Saudi Arabia. Like what happened in New Orleans, this driver acted alone in committing this crime. Shortly after the attack, I thought this was really interesting. The Saudi government said that they had warned German authorities about this man, and German authorities confirmed that that was the case, but said that the warning was unspecific, so they didn't really act on it. A clear motive for the attack hasn't been confirmed by authorities, but Germany's Interior Minister, Nancy Faeser, said that the suspect was evidently Islamophobic. Now, according to reports, he'd posted at length on social media about renouncing his Islamic faith, and he'd expressed sympathy for a far-right German political party. So he's now been charged with 5 counts of murder, and we can expect for that case to now run its course.
Okay, let's move on to the other biggest global story from the past fortnight.
Yeah.
The plane crash in South Korea. I saw this video everywhere.
Yeah, very haunting to watch it happen kind of in real time.
Yeah, what happened?
Hi there, my name's Emma. I'm the editor at the Daily Aus, just popping in to say hi and let you know that here at the Daily Aus, we are an independent media company who work to break down the news for young Aussies in a digestible and accessible way. If you like what you're watching and you like what we do, please hit the subscribe button. Now back to the video.
So this took place on December 29, just before the new year. And what happened was a plane crashed while landing at a South Korean airport. It killed 179 people and left 2 survivors. And those 2 survivors were air stewards who were sitting at the very back of the plane and were therefore able to be saved, but no one else on the plane was saved. Now, it was a Jeju airplane. That's a discount airline. It was arriving in from Bangkok. But what we understand to have happened and what all the video footage shows us is that it skid off the runway as it was arriving in, ended up hitting a concrete barrier. Lots of questions about why there's a concrete barrier there. It then burst into flames. And as I said, you can kind of see all of this happen in the video footage. At the time, the airline said, "We lower our heads in apology to everyone who suffered in the accident." And the country then held a week-long period of mourning. Since that time, South Korean police have raided both the international airport and the Jeju Air offices, and police have said in a statement that they plan to swiftly and rigorously determine the cause and responsibility for this accident in accordance with the law and principles. So very clearly being stated that this was an accident, but not clear exactly how it happened or who is responsible for it happening. Interestingly, police have banned the head of that airline from leaving the country, and there are reports that he could face charges of causing deaths by negligence. So that'll be a really interesting one to watch.
So the suggestion that potentially something came across his desk that could have improved the safety of the plane, and he didn't act on that.
Yeah, I mean, we don't know, but that's seemingly what is happening here. And I do think just before we move on that it's important to acknowledge that this crash occurred amidst a very fraught political context. So the other headlines you might have seen over the break pertain to the South Korean president. Now, just before we went on break, the president was impeached, and that was after he declared a brief period of martial law in the country. But then on Friday, authorities moved to arrest him. So that's the former South Korean president. Authorities moved to arrest him. And so when this plane crash happened, and indeed over the period that's happened since, there's been an acting president who's had to lead the response to the crash.
Okay, so a lot happening in South Korea. It kind of feels like there are two themes of news that happened over the break. We had the vehicle attacks, and then we had this plane crash in South Korea, and then there was also another plane crash, right?
Yeah, there was. Very different story here, but just days before the South Korean plane crash, an Azerbaijan Airlines flight crashed in Kazakhstan, and that crash killed at least 38 people. But the reason that I say that it's a very different story to South Korea is because there they are claiming that this was very clearly an accident, though they don't know exactly what happened. But shortly after the crash over Kazakhstan, Azerbaijan's transport minister claimed that it had happened following external interference. At the time, the government wasn't overly specific about who was being blamed for the crash, but it was pretty obvious that they were talking about Russia there. And then Russian President Vladimir Putin apologized for what he called the tragic incident that occurred in Russian airspace, but he didn't take responsibility for it. After Putin's apology, Azerbaijan's president said that Russia must admit its guilt and pay compensation for the crash. He said in a televised address that we can clearly say today that the plane was shot down by Russia. This is a fact.
So just to be clear, Russia did apologize for this plane crashing.
Because it happened in Russian airspace, but not like they didn't take responsibility for anything.
Okay, so they haven't said that it was them.
No. So after Azerbaijan's president accused Russia, we haven't heard anything since from Russian authorities, except that apology that happened before fingers had been pointed.
I see.
But it should be said that Vladimir Putin apologizing for anything is fairly rare. But yeah, there were two big plane crashes that occurred within days of each other.
Well, let's hope that it's not a sign of things to come for 2025.
No, we're only up from here.
Yeah, we hope that it's going to be filled with a bit more positive stories in the year to come. Lots of stories to keep an eye on, though. Zara, thank you for taking us through it.
Good to be back, Billi.
And thank you so much for listening to this episode of The Daily Aus. We will be with you throughout the entire year. It is an election year in Australia, so we will be here by your side every step of the way. Thank you so much. Have a great day, and we'll be back again this afternoon with your afternoon headlines.